Thank you to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. Final Fantasy's history is a wild ride. Initially a last-ditch effort to save a near-bankrupt developer, it has now blossomed into a full-blown empire, with 16 main entries, myriad remakes, and dozens of spin-offs. In recent years, though, the series has undergone a huge metamorphosis, and Final Fantasy XVI, while containing many of the same themes and motifs of the series as a whole, is almost unrecognizable from a combat perspective. So much so that many hardcore fans of the series have declared it not a real Final Fantasy.
Rejected!
And by many hardcore fans, I mean me.
Any objections?
However, no matter how much I deny it, it is a Final Fantasy. And in this video, I'm going to discuss the complicated maturation of combat in Final Fantasy, its towering peaks and abysmally desolate valleys, and most importantly, my predictions about the cloudy future of combat and gameplay in this series. And spoiler alert, my outlook is slightly grim. And by the end of this video, I'll answer the question: has Square Enix ruined Final Fantasy's combat? And will they be able to rescue it and bring the series back to its former glory? The original Final Fantasy, despite being released on the NES, was monumental and featured many core mechanics that would become series staples. The general structure of combat was literally just taking turns. The speed stat determined who would act first. However, there was some randomness involved to adding spontaneity. No matter their speed stat though, every unit in battle would get one action per round. This consistency could be incredibly punishing, particularly for the game's strongest enemies, but it still felt fair as combat was reasonably predictable. The game also introduced Final Fantasy's first jobs. At the beginning of the game, each character is assigned one of 6 job classes by the player. These jobs would determine the base stats and abilities of the 4 Heroes of Light, and as characters level up using experience, each character becomes stronger incrementally, a classic RPG mechanic. The jobs can also be upgraded later in the game, gaining enhanced battle statistics and new skills. For example, the physically attacking warrior can become the knight, gaining the ability to also cast some white magic. Thieves can become ninjas and acquire some black magic. Red, white, and black mages start with the ability to cast magic, but will then be able to cast more powerful spells in their mature forms. And do you know what else just reached its ultimate form? My chair. I've been looking for a new chair for a long time. I work in my chair 5 hours or more every day. Sometimes my chair makes me so uncomfortable that I have to take a day off. FlexiSpot sent me the C7 Max, an ergonomic gaming chair that focuses on sacral support, and the backrest can be adjusted to fit your height, meaning this really is a chair for all gamers. The memory foam on the seat rest allows for 12 hours of comfortable seating, the 5D armrests have height and rotation mobility, the footrests allow for crisscross applesauce seating, and best of all, the chair reclines. Look ma, no hands. Setting up the chair was super easy, and it's a huge improvement over my old chair. Use my links in the description-do along with my code C750 to receive $50 off your order. FlexiSpot has a 30-day return policy, making it a risk-free investment, and with their 10-year warranty, they'll directly replace any damaged parts. Make a long-term investment in your comfort with a C7 Max gaming chair. Thank you to FlexiSpot for your support, and let's get back to talking about the evolution of jobs. Jobs, along with their upgrades, add crucial flexibility to the game. The player can mix and match from jump to create a team that aligns with their playstyle. You can create a party with multiple different jobs if you crave balance, or a team of 4 black mages if you love burning, freezing, and shocking stuff. Or you could create a team of 4 white mages if you truly hate yourself and don't want to do any damage ever. This flexibility creates replay value. The concept is reasonably self-explanatory, but replay value is the value the player gains by playing a game a second time. And it's certainly possible for any game to have replay value, as evidenced by the speedrunning community. But there are many specific ways that developers add replay value to a game. Multiple endings, New Game Plus, and difficulty levels are 3 examples that come immediately to mind. But the job system in the original Final Fantasy is one of my favorite ways that this has ever been done, because choosing different jobs completely changes the feel of gameplay. A team with no white mage has to rely on items to heal. A team with only mages bosses is squishy and difficult to pilot safely. But still, by providing the player with choices that impact the gameplay so profoundly and permanently, it can almost feel like you're playing a new game every time you start a new save file. The magic system in this game is also important. Every spell has a level, and you get a certain number of casts of each level of spell. So you can cast spells of level 1 to 4 a certain number of times. After your magic points are gone for a specific level, you need to heal before you can use them again. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this system, and the reason is less about gameplay itself and more about logic. If you have a level 2 spell available, you should be able to use that point for a level 1 spell. But even with this minor flaw, the first Final Fantasy created a functional, albeit rigid, battle system, and it made the entire game feel like a puzzle. Because the game is turn-based, each party member is a unique chess piece with its own strengths and weaknesses, and sparring with a boss can be a tactical nightmare. You can easily lose control of the situation and get destroyed within a couple of turns if you don't play carefully. That adds to the game's charm though. Victory is hard won, but incredibly satisfying. But then Final Fantasy II took the limited flexibility of the original game and amped it up to 11. Rather than asking the player, what can you do with these characters' abilities, Final Fantasy II asked, what if everyone could just do everything? Jobs were largely discarded. Instead, each character could use every single spell in the game and equip any weapon they wish. Even levels themselves were a thing of the past. Every single stat could be improved individually just by making use of that stat. For example, attacking raises strength, using magic raises magic and magic points, and most importantly, dodging attacks raises evasion. And while this isn't a video about ways to break Final Fantasy games, leveling up while holding 2 shields is also a really broken way to raise this stat along with agility. And agility also raises evasion. Completely busted. If you're a casual player though, you might not even notice these mechanics, and that's both a strength and a weakness of this system. By removing the experience system, the game might feel like less of a grind. However, to me, that feels more like a drawback. I appreciate transparency. I want to know not only that my stats will increase by using them, but also when they'll increase and how much work I need to do to get there. When I played Final Fantasy II, I felt like my agency had been stripped away. If I couldn't beat a boss, I knew I needed to grind, but I was just never sure how much. And I hate that feeling. Whereas in the original installment, I could see exactly how much experience I needed to reach my next level. I'm also mixed about the fact that guest characters, unlike the main party, are essentially just placed into jobs. Not literally because jobs don't exist, but Minwu, for example, is very clearly a white mage. He has a ton of powerful white magic spells and very little physical ability. Joseph, or Yosef, is built as a monk with high physical ability. And perhaps these characters are just meant to illustrate how you could build a character to fit a specific role. But to me, these side characters exemplify the problem with the game. Having no guardrails for characters is like being a kid at Chuck E. Cheese with a bottomless soda cup. When you mix all the sodas together, they just blend into a sweet caramel-covered mess. And yes, I did do that as a kid, and the result was that everything just tasted like root beer. Which, as a child, I loved, but I'm an adult now and I need some differentiation. Which is what Square delivered with Final Fantasy III. They respected both the restrictions placed on characters in the original as well as the new flexibility added in Final Fantasy II. Rather than being able to raise every stat individually, jobs and experience points were back, locking characters in place during each battle. But, to add flexibility, the ability to switch jobs at any time was added outside of battle. Switching, though, was heavily disincentivized with the capacity system. This system penalizes characters every time they switch jobs. And I'm not going to get too deep into the nitty-gritty of the capacity system or the adjustment phase, particularly since all penalties for job switching were completely removed in the Pixel remaster. But in short, all penalties could be completely overcome by fighting in the new job for a while. The next installment, though, takes one step back in terms of flexibility and one huge leap forward in terms of mechanics. Final Fantasy IV's combat was host to many smaller changes and one huge bombshell. First, while the first 3 games only allowed 4 characters, Final Fantasy IV allowed 5 characters in a party, and it also expanded the roster to include a number of mandatory but temporary teammates. But that's not too revolutionary. Final Fantasy IV also removed all character flexibility, giving each character defined abilities based on level. But with these more rigid boundaries came hybrid roles. Rydia Lydia started as a white and black mage, but eventually replaced her white magic with summons. Rosa fills the role of a white mage and an archer. And Kain slots in as a dragon and a colossal. And while these hybrid jobs aren't completely revolutionary, FF1 had some jobs that could do multiple things as well, they were a refreshing change of pace from the prior installments. And I'll circle back to those later, because Final Fantasy IV had one more trick up their sleeve that would change everything. That's really dramatic for no reason. Okay, but for real.
Be real, girl, be real.
In the prior games, you would choose all of your character's actions at once, and then every unit would act consecutively. But Final Fantasy IV implemented the ATB, the Active Time Battle Meter. This meter is a timer that fills up in real time. When a character's ATB timer reaches its maximum value, you can choose an action with that character and then they immediately act. Kind of. Let me come back to that. Anyway, one of the big impacts of this system is that it completely changes the function of the speed stat. In the true turn-based era, speed just determined who went first after choosing attack. And in a way, it still does, but a lot of that now falls on the player, because your reflexes now matter as much as, and sometimes even more than, your character's speed. If your ATB fills up and you don't choose an attack expediently, the enemy team can just keep attacking and flatten your characters into Final Fantasy branded pancakes. Or crepes, I guess, if that's what you prefer. I don't know your life. Eat what you want. And because there are 5 characters in every battle now, every character is a little bit squishier. So a single slow input can lead to an even faster death. And just for the actually crowd out there, you can totally still actually me if you want, but I want you to know that I'm thinking of you and I love you. An ATB system is technically still turn-based. Each character still takes turns. It's just the way those turns are selected and executed that are different. And as I mentioned before, usually characters act right after you select their move, but sometimes acting actually means waiting. Let me explain. Many skills, specifically magic skills, have a charge-up time. After you choose them, your character has to spend a little bit of time, or a lot depending on the spell, focusing on the spell so they can cast it. Or maybe they're just like chanting the words necessary to cast the spell. That's what it looks like anyway. Listen, I'm not a witch. I don't know how spells work, okay? But witches, leave me a comment. Importantly, what this all means is that when casting a spell, your mages, usually the most squishy units in your party, now have a new obstacle to overcome. They can now be killed while charging up for a spell. And as I alluded to, the time necessary to charge up varies for each spell, with the most powerful spells having the longest charge time. Sometimes absolutely stupid long. So long that sometimes the enemy will get like 2 attacks before your mages cast their spell, bringing you back to square one. In addition, some of the actual most powerful spells in the game can be cast only by the twins Palom and Porum with Twin Cast, an ability that forces them to combine their powers to cast one spell but share the MP cost. And if just one of them dies, the spell is cancelled, amplifying the issue. Ultimately, the point is that the ATB system created a hybrid between a true turn-based system and an action-based system. Yes, it's still turn-based, but your reflexes and mental acuity matter in equal measure, since you can just get wiped if you don't act. I think of true turn-based combat kind of like the game Mancala. If you haven't played the game, it's actually really cool. The board has 14 wells. If you put a bead into your large well, you score a point. And because the game is turn-based, there is always an ideal move. You have as much time as you need to calculate the ideal move, and your move gets executed immediately after being selected. The ATB system, however, transforms turn-based Mancala into lightning-fast blitz chess. And the complexity combined with the urgency, no, the emergency of selecting moves is exhilarating. Whereas true turn-based sometimes feels plotting and overly analytic, the ATB incites delightful panic and chaos, like eating a chili pepper, forgetting to wash your hands, and then massaging your... Meeting the excitement of the ATB head-on is a hard task, but square up the ante even more with Final Fantasy V. Square took a step back from flexibility in Final Fantasy IV, but in Final Fantasy V, the pendulum swung all the way back. FF5 also has an ATB, meaning you still get that same urgency you get from Final Fantasy IV's. But in this game, the box of tools available is wide open once again, similar to FF3's, because in Final Fantasy V, jobs are back. Jobs that you can change outside of battle, a greater number of them with more varied abilities, more on that in a sec, and all penalties for switching jobs are cut kaput. In fact, you are very much rewarded for changing jobs in this game. As characters' job levels increase, each job gains new abilities. But I think Square was reading my mind, my future mind, like 15 years in the future when they made this game. Let me explain. Many of you probably know that I work as a doctor in my non-YouTube life seeing patients in the hospital. That's like the main thing I do. But at a certain point after finishing the 4 years of medical school and 4 years of residency, I kind of feel like I've leveled up that job to the point of diminishing returns. So I've been focusing my energy on YouTube. But I didn't just give up being a doctor. And Final Fantasy V did the same thing. It gave every single character a side hustle slot, also known as a secondary ability slot. Your character has a job, they level up that job, and then you can switch jobs at any time. But once your character switches jobs, they can equip one ability from another job, allowing them to fill multiple roles. So if your white mage has enough levels, they can then become a black mage and equip that healing magic as their secondary ability. Or you can turn them into a physical attacker and do the same thing. Or even better, if you master a bajillion jobs and then have nothing more to level up, you can switch your character to a freelancer. The freelancer can equip any equipment in the game, can equip 2 abilities from any class, and most importantly, gets the best stat from every job you've mastered. They can literally do any job just as well as the other jobs you've mastered while also removing all of their vulnerabilities. And just to give what I think is the strongest example, if you master Black Mage and Monk, oh shit, the pronunciation police. I made this video about the best M word in Final Fantasy, and the pronunciation police got on my ass, specifically about the way that I pronounced fist specialist. But anyway, I'll link it in the description, so just comment there about that, and we're gonna just choose a different example. Let's say you master Black Mage and Knight, and then you switch to Freelancer. Your character will have a high magic stat, meaning they can still nuke stuff with Blizzaga or Flare or whatever spell you want, but they'll also have the HP and defense stat from the Knight. So the squishiness of the Black Mage is gone, the bad magic stat from the Knight is gone, and the best components of both jobs married to become greater than the sum of their parts. By the way, speaking of jobs, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As I alluded to, I spend most of my time working on YouTube. However, I am working hard to make YouTube my full-time job, and support from you, the audience, is extremely important to make that happen. Specifically the support from my channel members, the Tantacles. They pay $5 a month to get early access to my content and to help me make more of it. I'm literally making a feature film-length challenge run every single month. Having the consistent income from channel members really helps when I publish a video that the algorithm says, nah, we don't think people really want to watch that as much, like my Expedition 33 challenge run. You know, where I beat the game with only my L, and then the bajillion dollars that I have to pay to my editors makes me feel sad.
Give me your f***ing money!
So if you love these videos, appreciate the editing that goes into them, and have a little bit of extra cash laying around, please consider becoming one of the Tantacles. Thank you. Anyway, while Square never exactly used the same formula of Final Fantasy V again, the novelty of more flexible characters filling multiple roles clearly influenced future installments. And in terms of just the jobs themselves, Square vastly expanded their roles. Some staples remained though. The mages, black, white, red, and time mages specifically, didn't change too much. And many of the physical jobs, Knight, Ninja, Dragoon, and Ranger just off the top of my head, are also very similar to their Final Fantasy III iterations, but each gained some new abilities that could be used in the secondary ability slot. But 2 jobs in this game completely changed the way that I think about this series. The first is the Blue Mage, and the Blue Mage is one of my personal favorites in the entirety of Final Fantasy. If the Blue Mage is affected by an enemy skill, it learns that skill and can use it at any time. They're the only class that can learn wind magic, they can learn healing magic through White Wind, and they can learn protective magic with Mighty Guard. No other class, save perhaps the Red Mage, who is actually much less powerful, has this much versatility. And going forward, the Blue Mage class would change markedly, but the concept remained the same. A valuable and highly recognizable gameplay motif that helped link the various future installments despite the fact that each was technically not connected to the others. And another job that has similar layers of versatility and will definitely come back into play in a future installment is the Chemist. The Chemist innately gets double effect from all used items, which in and of itself is good but not that special. But once the Chemist reaches job level 2, it gains the Mix ability. Final Fantasy X lovers, you know exactly what I have to say about this ability. It is bonkers. Completely broken. Because Mix allows the Chemist to mix 2 items together and completely change their effect. And this stacks with with their ability to double the effect of all items. And I'm not going to say any more about this ability right now because I don't care how broken this ability is. Because hello a second time to my Final Fantasy X lovers. Final Fantasy VI once again changed everything. Sure, the ATB still exists, and characters are unique enough, each having one unique innate ability, but this installment further prioritized flexibility. Initially, though, only a couple of characters have magic, and each character's unique command is crucial to conquering the game's challenges. But eventually, you get access to Magicite, and these items, which are essentially dead exotic animals that you can equip to your characters, teach them magic. No, I'm not kidding, and it's actually even more sad than that, but that's a topic for another video.
I'm not gonna say nothing today.
By equipping Magicite, each character can learn every single spell in the game. But there's actually more than that, because some of the espers also give bonus stats upon leveling up, and one of these stats is magic. That means it's relatively trivial to just equip one of these espers to a character, level them up, and maximize their magic damage. This system does have a couple of disadvantages. The flexibility makes many characters seem extremely samey. If everyone has access to the same powerful spells, does it matter which character you use? Well, yes it does, because Final Fantasy VI is the first game where you actually have a choice as to what party members you can use. And I'm gonna be honest, writing the script for this video is the first time that I processed that fact, and I think it's what makes Final Fantasy VI one of my personal favorites. Because the flexibility of having extra party members, 10 extra party members to be exact, since the game has 14 total playable characters, is a tremendous addition to the game. Oh, and I'm not counting the temporary Moogles or Leo, of course, just the permanent playable characters. While some character development is sacrificed in the name of variety, the benefit goes far beyond player choice. Because in multiple sections of Final Fantasy VI, you need multiple parties, meaning all of those characters you benched are now a liability. Neglected, underleveled, under-equipped, maybe even unequipped, and now forced to participate in battle. And this newfound freedom, this boundless potential filled me with regret. Because when I first played, I was not ready for the boss battles. I was using my favorites as many of us do and ignoring everyone else. But it also instilled some curiosity. Who is this person I've been neglecting? Why are they here? Why does Interceptor, the guard dog of this mysterious ninja, like this seemingly unrelated baby girl so much? Why did this sexy muscle man turn down the opportunity to rule an entire kingdom? Why is this giant yeti besties with this silly Moogle? Okay, they don't answer that third question, but maybe in a remake. No, seriously, how do they meet? Do they have romantic candlelight dinners every Tuesday? Does Monk put his to a mouse? Final Fantasy VII once again reinvented the recipe. Remember Top Chef? And when I say remember, I mean it's still in the air, right? Isn't it? Oh wow, it's still on. Okay. Well, let's talk about Top Chef. For those of you who live under a rock or a frying pan, this is the reality television show in which chefs compete to make the best possible dishes. The show itself is clearly not the topic of this video, but what I want to talk about is this one type of dish that the chefs make on the show, the deconstructed dish. Think about a dish like clam chowder. The whole is clearly greater than the sum of its parts. The clams, the cream, the potatoes, the oyster crackers, which honestly are 100% necessary. Don't argue with me about this. I'm right. The summation is a rich and savory dish with fantastic texture that is incredibly satisfying. However, the dish's preparation makes the individual components unrecognizable. But when a chef deconstructs a dish, they take each individual component, separate it out, and experiment with flavor and texture to create a wholly new dish out of the components. So you might deep fry the clams, create a whipped cream that you add to it, and then a bacon ice cream to go on top. Okay, I'm not a chef. This would not make a good deconstructed dish. Please don't try this. I do hope, though, that I've gotten my point across. Separate out the components, do something new with them, and create a new unified dish in which each component is more individually recognizable. And Final Fantasy VII did this with materia. Little colored balls that you can equip to your characters to give them all of the abilities from the prior games. Magic, stealing, throwing, raising stats. You can connect two materia to modify the ability to hit all enemies, or make one materia act as counterattacks. There are literally millions of ways to combine these little danger blobs to make your characters unique. The trade-off to this system, though, is that the characters are now even more interchangeable than in Final Fantasy VI, with a couple of exceptions. First, weapons, mostly ultimate weapons because the other ones are largely the same, sometimes have unique effects. I think the most unique one is Cloud's Yoshiyuki, which gains a huge huge power boost if your other party members are dead. But more importantly, and somewhat iconically, the characters are differentiated in another way. Because backing up a bit, there's something else that I didn't tell you about Final Fantasy VI. If a character in FF6 is at low health and uses a regular attack, they have a 16% chance of using a stronger attack called a Desperation attack. Not a huge or game-breaking effect, but they're actually pretty cool when they happen, and every character has one. So Square clearly saw potential in Desperation attacks, they amplified them, they expanded them, and they gave the player more consistent control of them.
Thus the
Limit breaks
were born!
And limit breaks redefined gameplay in Final Fantasy. After taking a certain amount of damage, a gauge fills up, gets pretty gay in the best possible way because rainbows are awesome, and allows you to select the limit break command. Each character besides Vincent has 7 possible limit breaks. Higher level limit breaks require more damage to become active, but as a trade-off, they also are more powerful. Well, okay, some of them are not that good, but some of them are complete world enders. A kill everything in one attack sort of situation. And I have a whole video in which I and NG Plus explain every single limit break in Final Fantasy, and I'll link that in the describly-do if you're curious about it. While every character can equip all of the materia and therefore use all of the abilities they confer, limit breaks make every character seem unique and special. Most of them just do big PP damage and kill, but they each have unique animations and effects. But one character's limit breaks, to me, create immersion in the way that the others can't even dream of. And that character is Aerith. Entire video essays have been made about Aerith's character and story, so I won't be giving you a full breakdown of her story points.
I love being alive.
But to explain my next point, I need to talk about her just a little bit. Aerith begins Final Fantasy VII as an innocuous flower seller in the city of Midgar, a city that is otherwise barren, and her appearance at the beginning of the game is somewhat of a Chekhov's gun. She's an innocuous detail introduced at the beginning of the story meant to be noticed and elaborated on later. And when you finally meet her again, it becomes clear that she represents something special. She's the only person who can make flowers grow in Midgar, she's gentle and arguably the most nurturing character in the game, and she is canonically not a powerful offensive force, relying on Cloud to save her from Midgar's military. She is the classic healer, and her limit breaks reflect that. She has not a single offensive limit break in her arsenal. She can stop enemies, I guess, but she can't actually outright damage them, at least not with limit breaks. And these combat choices seem so obvious, so custom tailored to her, that her combat abilities in and of themselves act as character development. And quick aside, Final Fantasy VII is definitely not the first in the series to do this. If we backtrack to Final Fantasy IV, Rydia, the game's Black Mage, can't use the fire spell because her hometown was torched by Cecil, the main character. She has to overcome her fear of fire in order to use the spell, a spell that is crucial to progress through the game. And in Final Fantasy VI, Terra can initially use magic because she's half Esper, and she eventually obtains the Morph ability after a mental health crisis. I wish all of my mental health crises ended that way, but I'm more of a fetal position and sob uncontrollably type of girly. Anyway, I think looking back on Aerith, her limit breaks now seem a bit too obvious to me. They just hit the nail on the head a little too cleanly. But on the other hand, maybe it only seems that way to me because Square Enix did such a great job with her characterization. Curious what you think? Do me a favor, leave a comment about it. I would actually love to hear your thoughts on this. But regardless of how well you think this was done, she is the archetype. I see the match between her combat traits and personality as a stepping stone that was built upon in later installments. For example, in Final Fantasy VIII, another game in which all of the characters are largely interchangeable with the exception of their limit breaks. But this time, Square refined the formula. At the beginning of the game, Rinoa has access to one limit break: Angelo.
Angelo. That has angel and jello in it.
She also has access to one cute doggo: Angelo. And she can use her limit break to launch a weapon at her enemies: Angelo. Which is honestly kind of unsettling. But about 2/3 through the game, Rinoa inadvertently absorbs the powers of a sorceress. Sorceresses in Final Fantasy VIII have immense magical talent, literally imbued with the power of an ancient god known as Hein. Their abilities are both feared and worshipped, and the threat of their magic is discussed constantly throughout the game. The danger of their overwhelming aptitude, in fact, drives much of the plot in the game. They inspire fear and awe. They're very clearly the enemy. They seem to have no redeeming qualities.
You don't have any talent. This is a show for talented people, not people that know how to buy shoes. You should not be here.
Your tone seems very pointed right now.
But late in the game, when Rinoa absorbs sorceress powers, the player gains more perspective. The ruthless, calculating, and manipulative monster we've seen up until this point is now replaced by a seemingly impotent adolescent. A girl with lofty ideals and limitless determination, but devastatingly weak noodle arms. Just absolute minimal combat skills, story-wise anyway. And she is desperately dependent on her allies' pugilistic power. The sorceress's reputation as a heartless villain is now completely upended, and I find it hard not to feel empathy and even pity for Rinoa. Sorceress blood is seen as a stain in FF8's world and a curse on humanity, and the fearful and overcautious government aims to put her in stasis, sealing her away for all eternity. And just before her surrender to the authorities, Final Fantasy VIII uses gameplay to illustrate a point rather than dialogue. As a kid, I didn't think much of this section. The player has actually just saved Rinoa, who honestly still seems pretty feeble, from careening into the depths of space.
There she goes.
And the player also likely failed several times along the way. Once she's saved, though, Squall and Rinoa board the Ragnarok, the game's airship, which has been infested by 8 propagators, and Squall and Rinoa must defeat them. And they can be quite difficult if you haven't prepared for them. And because of that, most people probably play it safe during this part of the game. But the developers left a little Easter egg here. An Easter egg that they were forced to place by the story. Rinoa is now a sorceress, so if her sorceress powers are going to manifest, she must have them during this portion of the game. But rather than give the player a tutorial, or even for that matter any acknowledgement of this fact, Square just gives you the ability to use it. And this is genius. In case you've never used it, Rinoa's sorceress ability is Angel Wing, a limit break that vastly increases her magical power. She briefly grows a pair of wings, which I think further reinforces that she's still one of the good guys, an angel, and then she enters a special type of berserk state. She will randomly use an offensive spell in her stock of spells. More on stocking spells in a minute, because we haven't even discussed the junction system yet, and the spell does 5 times its normal damage. And she will remain in this state until the end of battle or until she dies. I beat this game with only girls, and Angel Wing was insanely broken in that challenge. I'll link it in the description if you want to watch it after this video, because it's awesome. But back to the point, Final Fantasy VIII was published in 1999. It didn't have a single voiced cutscene, and a less savvy developer from the current era might think that the only viable avenue for storytelling is written dialogue. But Square was playing a different game. They used gameplay, the most compelling resource in their arsenal, to illustrate Rinoa's ascension before explicitly informing the player of its consequences. The combat mechanics tell the story. It's show don't tell, and the fact that it's not explicitly explained right away is a mystery to be solved. No doubt some clever 12-year-old, it wasn't me, I'm an idiot, I still am, no doubt some delightfully precocious 12-year-old figured out how broken limit breaks were, set up their party to exclusively use them, and immediately knew that Rinoa was a sorceress before it was revealed. And just to be clear, I'm not saying there aren't other hints that Rinoa is a sorceress. There are a lot of other hints. Dr. Odine tells Adia that she passed on her powers. Rinoa is literally shown to be possessed by Ultimecia, the sorceress of the future, and I'm pretty sure they also tell the player that Ultimecia can only possess sorceresses at some point. So why does it matter? It should already be apparent to the player, so why is this small change so significant? So you guys, some people don't read the dialogue, and many people, even if they read it, won't retain it. And of course, some people just might be playing the game in a non-native language. I've personally never been able to do that with an RPG because I feel super lost. I mean, I'll watch anime with subtitles, but that's different. But even for those who are reading, on average, people only retain 10% of what they read. I identify with that, but even though I can't retain reading, I can can still name just about every single limit break in Final Fantasy. I still remember every single spell in every single game. Weird status effects, strange battle mechanics, and most importantly, the way characters feel to play. And getting a new limit break at this juncture of the game is a huge change that will clearly prompt a player to want to investigate. Final Fantasy VIII also introduced the junction system. And the junction system, like the materia system, is another way to deconstruct characters. Rather than just giving materias to your characters to use, you place magic spells in their inventory and then junction it. Or in other words, assign it to your character's stats to strengthen them piecemeal. And this system is controversial, to say the least. I'm a huge fan of it because I like breaking things, but many people found it confusing at best and tedious at worst. And the game constantly unequips all of your junctions, nudifying your characters and forcing you to spend time in the menu rather than actually engaging in combat. Having spells count as inventory items also means you have to collect those spells. And doing that, particularly early in the game, means hitting the draw command to extract magic from enemies. And to acquire 100 of each spell, the maximum amount, you have to draw each spell a minimum of 12 times, since you can only draw 9 spells maximum each time you use the command. But there is one more thing about this combat system that bothers me personally. As I mentioned just a second ago, the junction system allows you to junction magic to your stats. But in order to do that, you have to junction a GF to yourself. But gamers can't do that because they don't have GFs. Just kidding, guys. The problem is that in order to junction magic, you have to also junction a Guardian Force or GF to your character. These are essentially monsters that join your party as additions to your character, kind of like Magicite from Final Fantasy VI. And in order to use any command other than attack, you also have to junction a Guardian Force to your character. And that includes the item command. And maybe this is a nitpick, but immersion-wise, this bothered me. I see no reason that I shouldn't be able to drink an elixir to heal, or throw a rock to damage an enemy, or buy a boat. No. But despite the various opinions about this game, thematically, the battle system fits perfectly into Square's era of limitless flexibility and robust player control. And not only in the main series, because in June of 1997, just 3 months before Final Fantasy VII was released, Square unleashed Final Fantasy Tactics. And I'm not going to get too in the weeds because I'm focusing on the mainline series, but Tactics had a job system similar to Final Fantasy V's. Leveling up jobs allowed players to unlock new abilities a la carte. But just like with FF7 and 8, it was a deconstructed system. Each character had 5 ability slots, one for their equip jobs command ability, a second for a secondary command ability type, and 3 more for passive abilities learned by leveling up jobs. So we have 3 games, each with abilities that can be assigned piecemeal in different ways. And you'd think after Final Fantasy VIII sold 3 million copies worldwide in the first month, Square would just stick to the same formula. Because at least in terms of sales, the customizable character approach was working. But with Final Fantasy IX, Square once again reinvented the wheel. With 3 successful Final Fantasy titles, Final Fantasy VII, VIII, and Tactics, all featuring extreme flexibility, Square slammed its giant lead foot into the brakes so hard that the princess in this game is shocked into silence halfway through Disc 2. Final Fantasy IX, much like Final Fantasy IV, is extremely rigid with regard to what skills party members can use, what stats they have, and even when they can use their limit breaks. Now, I'm not a gaming historian, just a lover of broken combat mechanics, so I don't know definitively why Square strayed from their up until now wildly successful formula, but I do have some theories. Maybe they were just trying to follow market trends, and maybe they were responding to player critique about Final Fantasy VIII by changing the formula. You can't really make gamers happy, as they always have something to complain about. But hey, the point is, there are a lot of reasons they might have changed up their style. But my main theory is actually really simple. Boredom. Making YouTube videos has been illuminating for me, and it's given me some insight into what other artists go through when making large-scale works.
Art.
And my Final Fantasy videos definitely aren't like AAA games that take 6 years of development with a team of 400 or anything, but they still take a lot of work. But Final Fantasy isn't the only series I play, and RPGs aren't the only genre of game I play. And while making videos about Final Fantasy is fun, doing the same thing over and over over just isn't always fun. That's why I've branched out into games like Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario, Expedition 33, and Metaphor ReFantazio. And I would wager that the devs at Square wanted to add some variety into their catalog to spice things up. And in the case of Final Fantasy IX, the risk definitely paid off. It harkened back to the 8-bit era's more rigid characters, but still strived to provide flexibility. And they did this by providing more party members, each member playing a unique role. They also put less emphasis on limit breaks in this installment. I didn't speak on it when I talked about Final Fantasy VIII, but that game basically allowed you to use limit breaks, which are completely broken, anytime your character is at low health. And yes, it's a lot more complicated than that, and there are other ways to use them, but that's the basic gist. Final Fantasy IX, on the other hand, introduced a new type of limit break, trance. After getting bopped enough times by enemies, trance activates, enhancing a character's native abilities for several turns, and in some cases, trance would trivialize the remainder of a battle. And to me, a tryhard sweaty gamer who wants to see as many big PP damage numbers as possible, this system feels disappointing. There is one clear value proposition for trance that trumps all else: using trance on bosses to make their battles easier. But if a random enemy bops you and your trance gauge is almost full, it can be completely wasted, because trance goes away after battle and the trance gauge falls to 0. However, while the timing and duration is an issue, it is easily apparent how powerful trance is. If you do manage to activate trance during battle, Zidane can melt through enemies with his dying abilities, Garnet can get free summons, and Vivi can use 2 black magic spells instead of 1. And trance is also accompanied by a physical transformation. Basically, the character just becomes a more badass version of themselves. In addition to being a powerful combat mechanic, it also is an important storytelling component. And doubling down on what FF8 did, instead of using battles to provide subtle plot hints, trance drives the plot forward more directly, because the player characters are not the only characters that can use trance. The antagonist of the game, Kuja, can transition into a trance state as well. It happens later in the game, and by this point, the player knows the animation very well and knows exactly what this means. The party is about to get wrecked. The gravity of the situation can only be understood by actually playing the game, learning the combat system, and feeling the power of trance for yourself. Because as I mentioned, trance isn't just a combat mechanic. The game actually explains trance in dialogue. Trance is the result of overpowering emotion in the face of antagonism. But Square doubled down again on immersion with Princess Garnet. Garnet is one of the game's 2 summoners. Unlike every other character in the game, she can use trance. About halfway through Final Fantasy IX, her mother is violently killed and her kingdom is ravaged by the dragon Bahamut, who, by the way, is her own summon monster, or Eidolon. This tragedy triggers an enormous mental health crisis in Garnet. The grief and stress from these horrific traumas drives her to mutism. But that's not all it does. It also prevents her from using trance. And her emotional anguish also causes many of her actions in battle to fail. So unless you exclude Garnet from your party, the gameplay changes are unmissable and poignant. Every action Garnet takes is a stark reminder of the atrocities she has suffered. You're forced to sit with her and suffer with her, knowing that every time you use her, your party will be weakened because of her trauma. And I think most players, once they realize this, will try to exclude her from the party. And actually, small sidebar, thinking about that now, it's actually kind of devastating. If you've ever had a family member die, a huge downturn in your health, or any other kind of catastrophic disaster in your life, it has profound impact. But if you have the wrong kinds of friends that expect you to be bubbly and cheery all the time, living up to those expectations can feel impossible. If you're seen as a downer, people might just stop inviting you to things, stop including you in their plans, because you're going to ruin the mood. And honestly, that's really cruel. People who have experienced tragedy often need their friends more, not less. So by benching Garnet, you're basically saying, sorry, your depression makes you useless. You can't sit with us. And listen, like, I know it's a video game. I know she's not real, but I don't know. I've definitely felt that way when I've had a low point. So maybe I'll use depressed Garnet in my next playthrough. I don't know. But anyway, if there's any other game that uses combat for world building the way Final Fantasy IX does, please drop it in the comments. I need to play it. And since I didn't mention it yet, Final Fantasy IX's combat, like the prior 5 entries, has an ATB system. So no changes there. But one thing that did change that I need to speak on is a crucial component of this game's combat, summons. But to explore summons in a complete way, we need to dive headfirst into Final Fantasy X. If you've never played Final Fantasy X, you've missed out on what many people feel is not just the best Final Fantasy, but potentially the best game of all time.
I'm that bitch. I'm that bitch.
And while I don't necessarily buy into that, it's easy to see why people feel that way. Part of the reason is that Final Fantasy X's story was captivating. It was the first Final Fantasy to feature voice-acted cutscenes, and it was also the first Final Fantasy game on the PlayStation 2. It felt like the beginning of a new era. And on a personal note, I don't know if any of you remember this, but for a long time, I was pretty obsessed with a magazine called Game Informer. The magazine initially started as a venue for the writers to review and talk about newly released games, write their own bootleg guides, and overall celebrate the media in the space while providing their personal takes and commentary. For some reason, I remember looking at the authors' names and their descriptions, and all but one of them specialized in RPGs. So it's no small wonder that amongst all the hype about Final Fantasy X, the character of this magazine changed. It shifted almost completely from a publication that tended to take a retrospective approach to one that focused almost exclusively on upcoming game previews. Did Final Fantasy X have something to do with this? Well, as it turns out, the editor-in-chief of Game Informer, just kidding, I have literally no idea. My point of bringing up this magazine is that I think the focus of video games in general really started to shift in this era. Top-tier games of the past had little to rely on for storytelling, but gameplay and written dialogue. And because the tools were so limited, they worked the systems available to their limits. However, the newfound focus on voice acting in games, along with the arms race of better graphics that continues to this day, eventually led to a decline in the quality of storytelling in video games as a whole. Or at least that's how I feel about it. But in terms of Final Fantasy X, not yet. It fell into an interesting middle ground. The arms race of immersive visual and audio storytelling was just beginning, but the mindset of allowing the gameplay to illustrate those story beats had clearly not yet faded from Square's institutional memory. We got the best of both worlds.
Hannah Montana.
But in a shocking twist that probably isn't so shocking given how this video has gone so far, Square did make another huge change. The ATB was no more. For now, anyway. Final Fantasy X rewound the clock, featuring exclusively turn-based combat. However, the system looks slightly different from those of the initial games in the series. In Final Fantasy 1 to 3, all characters' actions were selected, and then every unit in battle received one turn in order based on speed. And unless you knew the enemy's speed stat, it could be very hard to predict who would act first. In Final Fantasy X, though, the player was given more insight. The turn order is explicitly elaborated visually, and the player only selects one character's action at a time. This made battles far more puzzle-based than in prior installments, with many characters given abilities to delay enemy turns. The system made every single turn seem more impactful. Adding to that impact is the fact that characters can be swapped in and out of the battle party during combat, allowing every single character to feel important, albeit not in every single battle. The game explicitly encourages you, both through tutorial and by varying enemy strengths and weaknesses, to switch characters frequently. Otherwise, the neglected characters would gain no experience and thus end up with an inescapable disadvantage compared to their colleagues. And when I first played Final Fantasy X, that is exactly how I played. Religiously, every single battle, I would switch between party members and have every single character defend until everyone had a turn. Except Kamari. Didn't really use him. Sorry. But when I first played Final Fantasy X, this system felt pretty disappointing. I had become so used to the fast-paced ATB system in earlier titles that this system felt slow by contrast. ATB makes battles far more dynamic, and the urgency it provides helps motivate fast progression. By contrast, Final Fantasy X's combat feels calculated and methodical at best, and it seems monotonous at worst. And I definitely felt it was boring when I first played the game, but I don't think I gave it a fair shake back then. It was just new territory for me. Sacrificing pacing for player agency wasn't wasn't something I was used to, and so I judged it harshly. But I was wrong about this combat system. Whereas Final Fantasy 7 and 8 featured limitless flexibility, and Final Fantasy 9 dialed it back to almost zero with the exception of party member selection, Final Fantasy 10 split the difference in a powerful way. And this was all thanks to the Sphere Grid. The Sphere Grid is the most comprehensive and intuitive leveling system I've seen in any RPG to date. Characters are not relegated to jobs, but they do start with a focused aptitude based on their stats and base abilities. For example, Yuna starts the game with some white magic, Wakka can blind enemies for 3 turns, and Titus has the ability to run away. But all of this information is captured by the game visually in the Sphere Grid, a map of stats and abilities. And maybe the devs were compensating for not really having a world map, I don't know. But each character starts in a specific space or node on the Sphere Grid, and for each sphere level they acquire by beating enemies, they can move 1 space. If that new space happens to be next to a filled node, they can use a big red ball to activate that node and gain its corresponding stat increase. Now, focusing on the US release, because European people had a different version altogether, each character starts several steps away from a central location on the Sphere Grid. So you might think they can just immediately turn back and learn someone else's abilities. However, they don't initially start with any freedom because that central area where Kamari starts is blocked off by lock nodes. And this is crucial because those lock nodes can only be removed from the grid with key spheres. Makes sense, right? Lock nodes, key spheres. But key spheres can only be obtained from treasure chests and enemy fights later in the game. This means that if you want your characters to get stronger, you're initially forced away from the central area and down one set path. Yuna and Lulu's paths are magic focused, Titus and Riku are agility obsessed, and Auron and Wakka's paths focus primarily on physical strength, which leaves Kamari, who is stuck in that central area. And maybe getting away from the point a little bit, this was a big problem for me, because you have 6 characters, all of whom have their own path and 1 straggler. But I do think most people will prioritize using their first key spheres to get Kamari onto the pathway of one of the other characters. This will allow him to learn the same abilities just on a delayed timer. But I am not a fan of this. And the reason is that the first time I played, I sent Kamari down Lulu's path, transforming him into a black mage. But by the time Kamari got started, Lulu had already learned 2nd level magic. And by the time Kamari got there, Lulu had also learned white magic and was on her way to the level 3 spells. At any point in the game, it was better to just use Lulu. Her base stats were more suited to using magic, and using Kamari to be Blue Lu when I could just use someone else better seemed like a waste of time. And to add insult to injury, Yuna's path pretty organically intersected with Lulu's. This allowed her to also learn black magic. And to add insult to injury once again, she is faster than Lulu, allowing her to get more turns, and she has a better magic stat than Lulu. So Kamari feels like he should just have his own path or otherwise be an NPC. By the end of the game, though, assuming that you're raising everybody, he's just as good as everyone else in combat, with one exception, but I'll get back to that. And this is because the Sphere Grid, while rigid initially, eventually opens up completely. Every character can be completely maxed out and given every ability. Also with one exception, the same one that I just hinted at. But overall, this system, this gradual unbinding of restraints that ultimately leads to complete flexibility, is frankly genius. So while I personally don't find the turn-based combat to be the best in the series, I do find the Sphere Grid to be the best leveling system available in any Final Fantasy game, because leveling up however you want is not the only genius of the Sphere Grid. You can also choose not to level up, just ignore the Sphere Grid altogether. And because that's possible, innumerable challenges have arisen among the fanbase. The most simple, of course, being a no Sphere Grid challenge, which I did, link in the description, yada yada yada. But as I mentioned, there are exceptions to the interchangeability of characters. First, as in Final Fantasy 7 and 8, Final Fantasy X's characters mainly differentiate themselves with their limit breaks, known as overdrives in this game. And while I don't think most of them do anything particularly notable beyond damage, there is one overdrive that completely changes the way the game is played: Riku's Mix.
You guys mind if I put in my mixtape?
It's showtime, girls.
I mentioned the chemist when I talked about Final Fantasy V, but Riku puts that chemist to shame with her mix overdrive. There are a veritable smorgasbord of item combinations available, and not all of them are overpowered. In fact, sometimes mixing two items together merely enhances their effects slightly, but her best mixes support the party in ways no character in any other video game can. Hyper Mighty G, for example, applies a ton of status buffs, like haste, shell, regen, protect, and auto life to the party. And the most famously broken mix is Trio of 9999, which allows any hit from a party member to deal 9999 damage to the enemy. And I don't know why they made Riku this powerful, except I kind of do. I think they purposely engineered it so that casual players just wouldn't figure it out. She comes to the party late and might seem weak to some players who are used to doing big PP damage with Auron or summoning with Yuna. Coming back to Yuna as well later.
I'm coming back for you, baby.
Final Fantasy X hides Riku's potential while still encouraging the player to use her, and that is actually genius. I mentioned before that the game requires you to switch in characters to make sure they all get experience. So if a character doesn't have clearly defined value in a particular battle, you might just overlook them. But Final Fantasy X immediately tells you exactly how to use Riku to get a ton of utility from her. The game transports you to Bikanel Desert soon after Riku joins, and the party is beset upon by a bajillion robots. And the most effective way to defeat them is to have Riku steal from them. This not only defeats them in one hit, no questions asked, but also gets Riku the extremely useful Albed potions. And at this point in the game, they represent one of the best healing options available. But this is all just a big distraction from her most powerful use case. And more importantly, her best skills being semi-hidden from a casual player beg the question, why? Well, I think the big reason, once again, is replay value. By creating hidden mechanics, or even just complicated mechanics that are difficult to figure out, like Riku's mix, your second playthrough can still feel fresh despite having to watch the same cutscenes, use the same characters, and tolerate the same old bullshit from Shalinda.
What do you do successfully? Quickly.
And even if you don't want to replay the game, you could just spend 100 hours discovering new mixes for Riku. And as I mentioned, Final Fantasy V also has a chemist. While not as broken, that job also has a ton of overpowered mixes that take time to discover. Though Riku's abilities are certainly more thought out, perhaps to the point of being excessive. But that's sort of the point. Why spend time discovering a mechanic that only has 5 components? I want one that has 100, maybe even 1,000. It's a game and I want to play it. I don't just want to click the same command over and over.
Oh, Lord. Again.
For example, like you might do with Yuna. I mean, that's a lie. I just needed a transition, guys. Yuna has a lot going for her. Her story is the most compelling in Final Fantasy X, her characterization is one of the best in the series, and she's not distracted by pool parties, possessions, or PTSD. But her unique strength lies in her summon ability. She's the only one that can do it, making her literally the only character with a unique and uncopyable battle mechanic that isn't an overdrive. And her summons as a whole are markedly stronger than all party members, particularly in the beginning of the game. But that begs the question, in Final Fantasy, were summons always this strong? The summoner job first appeared in Final Fantasy III, and the class featured several faces that probably look familiar to anyone who has played the later installments in the series. Shiva, Ramuh, and Ifrit. The ice, thunder, and fire summons that are in most games in the series are present here, along with Titan, Odin, Leviathan, and Bahamut, all staples. And while the class certainly isn't impotent, it definitely isn't overpowered either. And in fact, the summoner is not even the best class in the game that can summon. The Sage wins that title. But Final Fantasy IV grew the summoner's power with Rydia, who gained many recurring summons as well as some new ones. And while the prior installment really only had damage-dealing summons, Rydia gets access to Asura, who can also provide support. And then Final Fantasy V Summoner gets even more utility, acquiring the Phoenix Summon. This can revive all party members in addition to doing damage. And then summons get crazy in Final Fantasy VI. This game has a total of 27 summons. Well, the original game anyway, and introduces even more supportive options, Carbuncle being the main one, another staple. Then Final Fantasy VII, which doesn't have more summons, but does feature an increased power level of the summons themselves, Knights of the Round being the primary example. It is enormous and can just wipe out anything, and Linked Materia can allow the player to cast multiple summons in one turn or just use them as counters. And then Final Fantasy VIII made summons even more powerful. Well, sort of, because as I mentioned before, junctioning GFs to your characters is strength itself, allowing for all abilities to be used. And these summons can even take a hit for your characters in an emergency. So as you might expect, the summons in Final Fantasy IX become even more powerful. Just kidding, they're similar in power. But it all kind of built up to Final Fantasy X, where summons hit their highest power level in the series. They can be used to finish battles for you, you can summon them to block huge attacks for a weakened party or a not weakened party. Listen, I'm not your mom's, play how you want. And while I didn't explicitly mention it for every game, summons in Final Fantasy X once again play a huge role in the plot. Their inclusion in battle is yet another example of immersive storytelling, since their presence, much like sorceresses in Final Fantasy VIII and materia in Final Fantasy VII, is deeply integrated into both battle and lore. But circling back to combat, throughout the series, we've watched the individual power levels of characters grow higher and higher, to the point where the characters in Final Fantasy X feel completely overtuned. Yes, even the ones I didn't talk about, but the truly broken ones are just a step beyond. But after Final Fantasy X, everything changed. Final Fantasy XI. I didn't play it because I don't like MMOs. The bare bones summary is that your characters will auto attack if close to an enemy, and you can also use skills. The cooldowns on the auto attacks sort of acts like an ATB. But what I really want to talk about is Final Fantasy XII, another MMO, except it's single player.
Oh, wow.
For real, this game's battle style is heavily influenced by MMOs. Your characters auto attack, but you can also choose skills for them. And this time you only control one character and the rest of your characters act independently. Oh, and you get an ATB again, explicitly, which I like. But rather than go completely off the deep end, Square Enix, yes, now a combination of two companies, which I'm not going to discuss further, hybridized the game, incorporating elements of combat from its predecessors to smooth over the inevitable transition that would make fans of classic Final Fantasy games rage. Because while you don't directly control characters' every action manually, they introduce the Gambit system, a system that allows the player to pre-program the game's AI to act exactly how they want. But of course, it's not that simple. Rather than just unlocking the Gambit system completely, the game requires you to seek out various conditions. And the mechanics of the Gambit system could be a video unto itself, but putting it simply, the Gambit is a battle state and it's paired with an action to create an if-then statement. For example, if an ally's health is below 30%, use Cure. If an enemy's health is below 10%, use Poach. But that first part, if a character's HP is less than 30%, enemy health below 10%, etc., has to be found, like an item. And as an added wrinkle, gambits are ordered. That means you can have characters prioritize more desirable actions. And if you need a character to deviate, you can input a command for them manually. So in this way, Final Fantasy XII still gives you control of all of your characters while allowing you to only focus on the one you're controlling, provided you're set up correctly. And honestly, I really enjoyed this system. I don't love that this system takes away some more direct control, but its flexibility allows you to pivot if you feel like the AI isn't making strong choices based on the gambits you selected. Unfortunately though, this game once again removed all differentiation from characters in a big way. It features the license board. This has a strong similarity to the sphere grid. You can increase stats and gain the ability to use various commands and equip various pieces of equipment by unlocking its nodes. However, there are largely no restrictions to how you can do it. Everything is available to everyone. Further muddying things, the game introduced a new type of limit break called quickening. And even though each character's quickening has a different animation, the quickenings all just largely do the same thing: big PP damage. And to add insult to injury, using a quickening depletes a character's entire entire MP bar, something that was changed in the Zodiac Age version, though I'm not going to talk about that version specifically since I'm focused on the original entries. The power of summons was also massacred compared to their prior iterations. All summons are available to every single character, provided they activate the appropriate square on the license board for the summon. And honestly, I hate this.
I hate.
Summons were absolutely perfectly integrated into the story of Final Fantasy IX and X, so to make them available to everyone in this game felt like a huge backslide in terms of story immersion. Add that to the fact that the Espers also couldn't be controlled. They had their own set of gambits that couldn't be modified at all, and they would just largely do their own thing. And again, this was changed in the Zodiac version of the game, which was a big improvement in my opinion. But unfortunately, the removal of control in 12 was just beginning, because Square Enix soon released Final Fantasy XIII. And in this installment, you now have even less control of your party due to the paradigm system. Final Fantasy XIII is the first game in the series that made me unhappy, because while Final Fantasy XII at least allowed you to override your character's innate instincts either with gambits or manual control, Final Fantasy XIII did not offer that luxury. Now, the only character you can explicitly control is the party leader, and the only control you can exert over other party members is to change their classes.
Change your costume, Mimi.
Specifically by choosing a different paradigm or set of 3 classes for your characters to embody. Changing your character's classes results in the secondary party members automatically using their new class's skills, but you still retain control over your party leader. But the game also introduced an auto battle system, which essentially automatically chose the best actions for your party leader. The effect of this was making me feel like generally the best course of action was just to click auto battle and not really participate in decision making. And with the best action now selected by AI and your secondary party members' actions also selected by AI, I felt like my role as the player was just boring. On a revisit to this game though, I gained some new appreciation for it, particularly given how future series further gutted the player's ability to direct combat. Ordering your characters to change class is still a puzzle. It's just a less open-ended one than before. Many battles do feel one note though. There's generally one ideal strategy and it's hard to deviate from it because of the lack of direct control. And while I really don't like it, I think that in hindsight, taking party control away from players was a crucial part of Square Enix's brand positioning. Final Fantasy XIV is a great game. No, I haven't played it. No, I don't currently plan to. But as a former lover of MMOs who stopped playing them because I can easily get addicted, I know that it's good. The game combines a robust job system with a robust story, and the game currently has 30 million registered users, though the number of active players fluctuates wildly. Purchasing the game entitles you to much of the game's content, but to truly get full access, Square Enix charges $15 per month. So as you might imagine, things can get pretty costly if you maintain a subscription. And that is really good for Square Enix, because what's better than someone paying $60 or sometimes more for a Final Fantasy game? Someone paying $15 per month, in other words, $180 per year for a Final Fantasy game. And yes, I do consider the MMOs to be real Final Fantasy games, even though I don't play them.
Okay.
But here's the problem that I see. If you compare a game like Final Fantasy X, a turn-based and relatively slow RPG, to one like Final Fantasy XIV, a semi-action-based and fast-paced, at least by my standards, MMORPG, you'll very quickly see that the kinds of people who play these games are very different. While there definitely is some overlap, the plotting and methodical gameplay of a turn-based RPG probably won't be too appealing to a character who wants to be part of a team, actively casting spells and whacking stuff with a sword, or a spear, or some other weapon. I don't know. I see MMOs as action RPGs, not JRPGs. Sure, some of the core mechanics like leveling and skill acquisition and even jobs are the same and share that overall branding, but the feel is so different. So given that MMOs are more action-focused and stray away from turn-based combat, how can you mobilize Final Fantasy players to play this extremely profitable game? Well, the answer is that you need to rebuild the brand. From here on out, the face of Final Fantasy has changed forever. Final Fantasy XV is completely action-based, with the player controlling only Noctis, the party leader. And ignoring all expansions, control of the other party members eroded even more. Some combo attacks were possible, but this game, from my perspective, was all about whacking things with a sword. To their credit though, Square Enix still included a robust system of magic. Each cast, however, had to be crafted. That being said, the system still bore some resemblance to prior installments, with spells having elements that could be used to exploit enemy weaknesses. Oddly though, magic was able to hurt the player due to a large area of effect and lingering environmental impact. And ultimately, Final Fantasy XV sold well. More than 10 million copies at the time of this video's production. And while I can't speak to player response, I will say that I didn't enjoy this game at all. As someone who loves turn-based combat, the changes implemented in this game were nothing but disappointing. And it was about to get worse for me with Final Fantasy XVI. But before we discuss that game, there's one piece of unfinished business that I can't ignore. Final Fantasy VII Remake was released in 2020, and Rebirth was released in 2024. And while these games are definitely action-based, I find them to be quite palatable compared to Final Fantasy XV. Unlike the original Final Fantasy VII, these games strive to make every single character feel unique. And the action-based combat is a huge part of that. You can control every single character and even switch between them during battle, and each party member feels wildly different to control. Cloud has a counter-based strategy, Aerith is more of a ranged attacker, and Tifa is a physical brawler with a charged attack mechanic. And even when not controlling a character, you can still command them in battle, much like in Final Fantasy XII. Any ability, including limit breaks, magic, and unique abilities, can be selected even if not currently in control of a character, and the battle pauses while you choose a command for them. And to me, this combat system makes a lot of sense. Boyfriend, why are you stalking me? He's right there. Any ability, including limit breaks, magic, and she's very cute. Where was I? And to me, this combat system makes a lot of sense. It scratches the itch I have for solving the puzzle of a battle, but it also satisfies people who prefer action. And even I, someone who openly prefers turn-based combat, found myself somewhat entranced. I played Dark Souls, I played Hollow Knight. I actually really like action-based combat.
Sure, Jan.
I do, and because this game is somewhat hybridized, it fulfills my expectations of a Final Fantasy game while also keeping me engaged with the action. This is really good. So why did they not just do that again? Before I talk about this, I need to put something out there. I like Final Fantasy XVI.
What?
I'm about to criticize the combat system really harshly. Some of you might get your fifis hurt by what I'm about to put out there, and I just want to say, suck it up. It's a video game, people.
It's not personal, it's drag.
I don't think this game is bad. It will never be a classic for me. It's not a game I will ever think of as a pinnacle of Final Fantasy. And I wish it were different, but it's not a bad game.
It's not bad, it's just not good.
Lovers of this game, you're allowed to like this game. It's even cool if you love it. Go you, but I don't, and it's mainly due to the combat. The gameplay in Final Fantasy XVI bears almost no resemblance to that of its predecessors, and it does, in fact, make the game seem more like Devil May Cry than Final Fantasy. That being said, it's not all bad. The combat has fun moments. I love parrying an enemy attack and seeing the combat slow down in Bayonetta Witch Time style. I also gain great enjoyment out of staggering enemies and then wailing on them. And I'll go into more detail in just a moment, but big picture-wise, my biggest critique of the combat in this game is that it all just feels very samey. You basically do the same thing for every boss. You dodge, you use abilities that deal damage and therefore build up the stagger gauge, you stagger the boss, you activate your limit break to wail on it while staggered so you can do increased damage, and then you rinse and repeat. And even though Clive does gain new abilities that change his attack patterns, I never really felt like my abilities markedly changed the way I would interact with the enemies. With one exception, I guess, Garuda's abilities. When a boss's stagger gauge is half full, Garuda can give you sort of a pre-stagger, knocking down the boss and allowing you to wail on it a bit. But even so, all that brief reprieve does is give you a chance to do the same thing with less interference. Attack until the boss's stagger gauge is full. Because unlike the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, the combat in Final Fantasy XVI is entirely action-based. Party members exist, but they're more like adjuncts to Clive than actual contributors. Magic does exist, but it's pitifully weak, and you're usually better off just whacking stuff with your sword unless the enemy is super far away. And limit breaks also exist, but it's really just Clive becoming a little bit more powerful and getting some passive healing rather than the disruptive, in a good way, mechanics from prior games. But oddly, the worst part of the combat to me is that elements, a key part of every Final Fantasy combat system up until this installment, with the exception of Final Fantasy XIII, basically don't exist. Damage is damage, and it's really only the quantity that matters. And I didn't put this in the script, but also status effects are gone, something that I love from other Final Fantasy games, and I'm planning a video where I talk about the weirdest status effects from Final Fantasy. The game also leans heavily into battles with the icons, the giant beasts akin to summons from which Clive draws the majority of his abilities. Typically, these fights feature a battle section with Clive doing his normal Clive whack with sword thing, followed by a sequence in which Clive transforms into Ifrit, whacking the monster with claws instead. Ifrit is cool though, and the transformation does provide some needed variety. But this is not the Final Fantasy I know and love. And just to reiterate, I don't think that this makes Final Fantasy XVI bad. Leave your hate comments, it's fine.
Mama, this is garbage.
The gameplay is engaging. It has a cool story. It has compelling character. Just one. It's not Clive. Okay, just kidding. Clive is cool too. But to someone like me who loves turn-based combat, who loves control, who loves puzzles, who loves combat that strengthens story elements, this game just doesn't scratch the tactical itch that I have. And so of course I wonder, are they gonna change this now? Are we going back to turn-based combat in Final Fantasy VII? I mentioned just a few seconds ago that I was dissatisfied with the gameplay of Final Fantasy XVI. If you don't remember that, I get it. ADHD is rough. But this whole question of where Square Enix is going, it's not just about me. And it's not just about turn-based RPG fanatics. It's about money. And how does Square Enix make money? By selling games. Now, I'm certain that if action-based games made by Square Enix weren't selling, they'd just stop making them. So are they selling well? Unfortunately, the answer to that question is complicated. Final Fantasy VII Remake, definitely action-based, has sold over 7 million copies. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, also definitely action-based, has sold at least 4 million copies. I think. It was hard to find the actual numbers. And Final Fantasy XVI? Well, according to Square Enix, it sold over 3 million copies in the week after release. And according to Square Enix, this did not meet their standard. I'm not going to get into the weeds in terms of the reasons for that because I honestly don't know. But I do think that the action-based combat in Final Fantasy XVI has been simplified to a point that fans of the classics see this as inconsistent with the brand at best and downright betrayal of the series at worst. Personally, I don't enjoy the gameplay very much, but I do fall more on the brand inconsistency side of things. But I'll be honest, I don't think that true turn-based combat is coming back. If you're watching this video after Final Fantasy XVII has come out and I'm wrong, please feel free to give me a neener, you're a big fat wiener in the comments. Thank you. But the reason I think this is that Square's big evergreen property, the game that will continue to make them money despite having a system that has been around for a long time, is Final Fantasy XIV, an MMO that truly is based on action. If I had to guess where Square Enix will go more specifically, my most optimistic prediction is that we will see gameplay that mimics FF7 Remake and Rebirth. These titles marry the control of old games with the action-based flair needed to garner interest in more modern titles. But I guess I haven't answered the question that I asked at the beginning of the video. Is Final Fantasy's combat ruined? Well, in Final Fantasy XVI, yeah, it is.
I feel very attacked!
But with Remake and Rebirth, I think we have a winning formula. A format that marries old with new. A format that creates a compelling bridge between a more Devil May Cry, God of War adjacent action-based system and the turn-based combat that defined the PS1 and PS2 installments. But let me know what your predictions are. Thank you again to FlexiSpot and their C7 Max chair for sponsoring this video. It can be returned within 30 days and comes with a 10-year warranty with direct replacement for damaged parts. For limited budgets, try their C5 chair and also consider their newly released C7 Morpher, an even more premium option with additional upgrades to the lumbar support and upper backrest. Use my links in the description with code C750 to get $50 off of your purchase. Follow me on the social media sites I'm flashing right here, and I will see you in the next one.